Timekeeper ready.
Ready.
My opponent ready. All right, let's begin.
Ask your video.
My name is Trey, and I will be representing the affirmative side of the resolution. A just society ought to presume consent for organ procurement from the deceased. Some definitions to clarify today's round. Deceased, brain dead, no brain activity for a specific length of time. A just society is a society that the rights of the minorities will be safe from the whims of the intolerant majorities by Pierre, the former Prime Minister of Canada. Presume is to take as proved until contradicted. Consent is permission. Organs is a group of tissues working together to accomplish a specific purpose. Procure is to obtain with care, and that's from the Oxford Dictionary, as are all of my definitions. My value for today's round is going to be the sanctity of life. And for a definition, the deceased do not have the sanctity of life due to the fact that they are not alive. My criterion, or how I'm going to uphold my value for today's round, is keeping as many people alive as possible. My first contention, a just society is to serve the living. A society has no concern with the deceased due to the deceased are not part of the society anymore. When it comes to living conditions or treatments of the people in the society, the deceased do not have any rights under society because they are not alive. Therefore, until contradicted, we must procure the organs. My definition of presume is to take until contradicted. The deceased are no longer part of society because they have died. And as my deceased definition is brain dead for a length of time. The deceased are not protected under society because they're no longer part and a functioning member of society. The living, or who we're going to give those organs to, are still part of society because they are living, productive members of society. Moving on to my second contention, the base fact is that dead people are dead. They no longer have life, emotions, or a soul. Therefore, their body is just a highly complex chemical composition that is decaying. There's no bringing them back because of my definition of deceased. So a society must do what it can for the living with the deceased. My third contention, the family can refuse at any time, and no one is forcing anyone to do anything. Presume does not mean that the deceased are automatically have their organs procured. It only means if the family does not say no. So if someone has not stated whether or not they want to have their organs donated, and their family does not say no, then we can procure their organs. A few statistics to clarify why today's round is so important. About 1.5 people die an hour in the U.S. from lack of organs, and that is from 2organdonor.gov. 124,000 people are on the waiting list for organ donation, and that is from organdonor.gov. Now, a quick overview of my case. Society is concerned with the living people. The living people are what make up society. The deceased are no longer part of society. Therefore, it is society's job and society's job to protect the living people. And if this means procuring organs from the deceased, then that is a just thing to do. The resolution states a just society. This is not a moral debate. It is not whether or not it is moral to take the organs or not. This is a just society, a society that is fair, a society that the rights of the minorities will be safe from the whims of the intolerant majorities. And a just society, must be concerned with the living people, not with the deceased, because the deceased are no longer part of society. And that is why I today stand on the affirmative side of the resolution. A just society ought to presume consent for organ procurement from the deceased. I now stand open for cross-examination.
I have a minute of prep time, please. Judge ready?
Yeah.
Timekeeper ready?
Ready.
My opponent ready?
Yes.
All right. Can you please restate your criterion?
My criterion is keeping as many people alive as possible.
Can you restate the tagline of your first contention?
A just society is to serve the living. A society has no concern with the deceased when it comes to living conditions or treatment.
Can you explain to me how your your first and second contention are separate.
Yes. My first contention is the just society is to serve the living, while my second contention focuses more on the deceased. So my first contention is more on the living part of society, and my second contention focuses more on the deceased.
Okay. That is all. Keep it ready.
Ready?
My opponent ready? Okay, first I will start by tearing down my opponent's case and then building mine. How much time do we have? Alright, my opponent said in his first contention that just society is to serve the living, and there is no concern for the dead because deceased people aren't part of the society or protect. I agree with that statement, but he did not specifically apply that to the resolution a just society ought to presume consent for organ procurement from the deceased. He did not speak about how it specifically pertains to that and how that will help the organ procurement and how it will better the living. His second contention, he said dead people are dead, there's no bringing them back, and society must do for the living, which is also very similar to his first contention, just with a slightly different focus. But I also agree that society must work for the better of the living, which is why presumed consent, or presumed consent only deals with a small minority, because it only deals with the person that is not, like when they have no family and there's just, it's just up to the hospital or the medical people to decide what to do with the body. But there is still, first of all, the person has the choice to check if they want to be a donor or not. And then after that, if that is unclear when it becomes, once they are deceased, then the family has a choice. So there are choices there. And then his third contention, family has the choice to consent, like I just said. That isn't presumed consent because the family is choosing. So therefore that doesn't stand, because that has nothing. Presumed consent is only when like the medical facility or whatever has to make the choice. It's not up to the deceased or the family. But the family has the choice after the individual, whether they decide or not. Then it goes to the family. And now I'll begin by my case. On the negative side, I'm Grant, and a just society ought to presume consent for organ procurement from the deceased, and so I will be negating that today. So my definitions: ought, used to indicate what is expected. Presume, presumed consent, the assumption that a particular action would have been approved by a person or party if permission had been sought. Assumption, the act of laying claim to or taking possession of something. Deceased, the Uniform Determination of Death Act says it is the irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions, which is determined by the persistent cessation of function after an appropriate period. And those definitions are by Merriam-Webster Dictionary and the Free Dictionary by Farlax. My value today is justice. My criterion is, it is immoral and disrespectful to unjustly take from someone else without proper authority or consent. My first contention, the opt-out program is not the solution for the shortage of organs to transplant. Researchers have proven that donation rates did not skyrocket, according to studies by Dr. Graciela Nauenstein of European University Institute. And Brian J. Boyarsky, a Johns Hopkins researcher, and Dori L. Segev, an associate professor of surgery at Johns Hopkins, also agreed. The family is usually asked if the individual did not make it clear. And this infringes on individual rights and is not just. The person must first make the decision themselves. My second contention, mandatory choice is a better solution to the need for organs. People would be required to demonstrate yes or no to the use of their organs in the U.S., but not limited to the U.S., because this debate is worldwide. According to psychologicalscience.org, 85% of Americans are willing to donate their organs, yet only 23% are given written consent. If people were required to choose, donations would spike. The system allows for individuals to make the choice. Contention 3. Presuming actions infringes upon individual rights. Presuming consent from anyone but the individual is theft. This is immoral and unacceptable principle. Spain only ever obtains organs with the express permission of the family, and it has the lowest rate of family refusal at 10%, and still has the highest rate of organ procurement in the world, according to medicalnewstoday.com. At the absolute minimum, our bodies must be left to our families to decide. If presumed consent is used, the United States has possession of us. This is a very dangerous fascist idea. That is all.
1 minute of prep time, please. My opponent ready?
Yes.
Timekeeper ready? Ready. All right, let's begin. First, I'd like, in your first contention, you stated the opt-out program. Can you define that real quick?
Yes, one moment, please. The opt-out program is just the person deciding that they're not, like, for example, on the driver's license in the U.S., not choosing to say yes or no, just leaving it blank.
Okay. And under the opt-out program, if they leave it blank, you are saying it's then up to the families?
That would be the next thing in a just society. It would go to the choice of the family at the death.
All right. In your case, you agreed that the society is supposed to serve the living. How is your case serving the living if we are not taking full advantage of the organs that we have available to us?
Well, in my second contention, that's why I said it would be mandatory choice is a better solution to the need for organs, because that way the person is, they're forcing them to choose. Therefore, according to psychologicalscience.org, like I said, 85% of Americans say they're willing to donate. So if they are forced to just go ahead and sign it instead of they just read over it and leave it blank, donation rates would spike.
Okay. You stated in your third contention that it would infringe on the rights of the people, but then you agreed that society is here to serve the living. So what rights by society are we infringing on of the deceased?
Can you explain that question a little bit better?
Yeah. We've already covered, you agreed that society is here to serve the living. And then in your third contention, you stated that it infringes on the rights of the deceased if we procure their organs with presumed consent. How exactly does that fit in if society is here to serve the living and not the dead?
Well, that's why I said it would be better if the person is forced to choose, because then it would get rid of that issue, and also, like with the family, would be the family is the closest thing obviously to that person, so that part would, it's just the taking of their organs when they haven't like said what they wanted and there's no family.
All right, thank you. No further questions. 30 seconds of prep, please. Timekeeper ready? Ready. Opponent ready?
Yes.
All right, let's begin. All right, I'm going to start off my first rebuttal by covering my opponent's case, then I'll move on to why my case stands. My opponent's value for today's round is justice. I agree. My opponent agreed in his constructive and both in cross-ex that society is here to serve the living. Justice is something that society is there to uphold. So my opponent's case saying that we need to respect the deceased and not presume consent, the justice value doesn't really work there, because he has agreed that justice and society are there to serve the living, not the deceased. His criterion is it's immoral and injustice it's unjust to take organs. My definition of presume was to take until proven contradicted, and this fits into my argument for a lot of his case. When he attacked my case and said that the families, we need to go to the families first if they have not given a definite choice, the hospital or the doctors or whoever is performing the organ procurement is they're presuming consent until the family says no. So the family still has the option to keep the organs and keep the body intact. But the doctors are going, because it is a very time-sensitive thing, the doctors are presuming consent until otherwise contradicted. My opponent's first contention was the opt-out program, meaning the person was not decided. The person, we do not have clear evidence. In this case, if we do not have clear evidence, then under my case, we go ahead until we're contradicted, until the family comes to the doctors and said we do not want the organs. So there is a choice, but since it is a time-sensitive thing, the doctors are able to go ahead, and so even if the family comes and says yes, sometimes that's too late. So the doctors can go ahead anyway. His second contention is that we need to just a just society would imply definite choice. So they have to choose yes or no. But there are cases that there is no identification. So there's not always a way to know. Even if they have made a yes or no choice, there's not always a way to know. So that doesn't really stand because it's an impractical application. His third contention says it infringes on the rights. But he agreed that the society is here to serve the living, and the rights of the people are protected under society. Therefore, if the society is here to support the living, then we can't infringe on rights that don't exist in a deceased body. On to his attacks on my case, he stated that I didn't apply why society is for the living. I believe I did apply it, but just to go over that really quickly, the resolution states that a just society ought to presume consent for organ procurement from the deceased. Now, where does the society serves the living come into this resolution? A just society is worried about the living. So if we say a society that is worried and has the job of protecting the living ought to presume organ procurement from the deceased, that just makes sense. If a society is concerned with the living, then they're going to do everything they can to keep the living living. The dead are already dead due to my definitions. And so if a just society is only concerned with the living, then they're going to do what it takes to help the living. And that's how it applies there. And so just to go over that. He agreed with my first and second contention that society is here to serve the living and that dead people are dead. He attacked that the families should still have a choice. And as I've already covered, the families do have a choice to say no, to opt out. But due to my definition of presume, we're going to go ahead until contradicted. Now, a quick restate of my case. My value being the sanctity of life was not...
Yeah, that's it. You're at 4 minutes. 6 minutes for your rebuttal.
Okay. Judge ready?
Yes.
Timekeeper ready? My opponent ready?
Yes.
Alright, let's begin. First I will attack my opponent's case and then rebuild my own. My opponent's first contention states just society is to serve the living and there is no concern for the dead because deceased people aren't part of society and there's no need to protect them. I agree with this and because it is concerned with the living and the individual is asked first before they're even deceased whether they want their organs to be procured after their death or not. And then secondly, it goes to the family. And so it is still serving the living because the family is being asked. In his second contention, he said, dead people are dead, there's no bringing them back, and society must do for the living. Majority of people don't die in a hospital on life support. Obviously, that's easy to procure organs because their body is being maintained and their organs may be deteriorating at a much slower rate, so they still can be used. They die places where their organs can deteriorate, like for say a car accident, or they may die at their home, but they're not on life support, so their organs aren't being maintained, so they will rapidly deteriorate and not be useful for organ procurement. So that does not stand, nor does his first. In his third contention, he said family has the choice to consent, which, as I've said, I agree, because that's how it works. Like I've said, the individuals have the first choice before death, and then it goes to the family. So that works for my case, because that is presumed consent. The individual was asked before death, and then after death, it went to the family. Well, when a person, like I said, most of the time, the time that the organs will be procured is when it's a lot easier when they're in hospice or whatever and they're hooked up to life support. The family will be contacted, if not already with the individual, long before death, and they will be comforting them and be with them, and so the family will easily be asked and can make a choice in plenty of time to have the organs procured. And Now I will begin by rebuilding my first contention, or my opponent's attacks on me. He attacked my value justice and said because presumed consent and the organ, it's not just to not presume consent because then people are dying from the organs that they don't receive. But that is why I've said that presumed consent only deals with a very, very small amount, because that's like the people that may not have identification or family with them to give that consent. But that's why there is the family. So that deals with a very small minority and not enough to make a significant impact. And he said the doctors are presuming consent until family answers. And like I've discussed, the family for the large majority will be there or will be contacted and will be able to respond and answer that. And he said in his case he addressed what if they don't have ID and so they don't know who the family is. Well, in those cases, the majority of the time they may not be identifiable because they were destroyed in a car accident. Therefore, your organs cannot procure. You're required to carry ID around. When you're driving, you have to have an ID on you. I mean, even homeless people can have an ID. You don't have to have a driver's license to have a form of identification. There are state and government mandated forms of identification. Therefore, they can be identified and their family can be contacted. So I'm just gonna go over my contentions again. So my first contention, as I said, is the opt-out program. It is not the solution to the shortage for organ to transplant, and that researchers have proven that donations did not skyrocket. My second contention, mandatory choice is a better solution. This would solve the problem of presumed consent. We wouldn't have to wait for even the family to know to give the consent for the organs, and it wouldn't be up to presumed consent because the individual would have said, yes, I want to donate my organs when I die, or no, I do not. And this would solve the problem. And like I've said, 85% of Americans say they're going to give and would. They just haven't taken the initiative to go out and do that, to say yes or no, I won't. So that would raise the consent, which is currently at 23% that have like actual consent. That would raise it 62%, saving thousands of lives, if not more. And presuming consent it's an issue because people need to be forced to make their own decisions instead of just not answering the question. And then if for some reason that did not happen, then the family would be able to make that choice. That is all.
Judge ready? Timekeeper ready?
Ready.
My opponent ready?
Yes.
Alright, I'm going to begin my final rebuttal by going over my opponent's case, then rebuilding my own quickly, and then telling you why I won this round. My opponent's case goes on the fact that we should just have mandatory decision. They have to make a decision. Well, that's not really staying true to the resolution here, because the resolution, we're not debating what we should do, we're debating how it says a just society ought to presume consent. So the negative's job here is to show how we should not presume consent, not a completely different way of going about it entirely. Now, my opponent's first contention, the opt-out program, basically the person needs to decide, or we give to the family. Since it's a time-sensitive thing, even if we go to the family, sometimes the family doesn't get back in time, so that's why we have to presume consent. And my opponent is stating that there's a very small majority that the presumed consent would apply to, but that's the small majority, if it is a small majority, that we are talking about in this debate. So that is what we're focusing on. So if they have ID that says, no, I don't want my organs, or yes, I do want my organs donated, then they don't apply in this debate. Or if their family is right there and they say yes or no, they don't apply in this debate. This is if the doctors don't know then they can presume consent to go ahead. And that fits in with my fact that society is here to serve the living. Now, back onto my case. My opponent did not attack my value or criterion, my value being the sanctity of life, and my criterion being keeping as many people alive as possible. My value and my criterion are the core of my case. My contentions are there simply to uphold that. Therefore, since my opponent did not argue them, he must agree with them. Therefore, my entire case stands because of that, because my value and my criterion are the heart of the case. Because that is the basis of the case, that'll get me into my voting issues for today's round. My voting issues, I have three. The first one is going to be, I stayed true to the resolution. I gave proof and evidence and arguments that a just society ought to presume consent for organ procurement from the deceased, and I stayed with presumed consent and organ procurement. My second voting issue is going to be that my opponent agreed with two of my contentions, my first two contentions, to serve that society is here to serve the living and that the dead people are dead. Therefore, those two stand, and my value and criterion stand, which is my third voting point, that my value and criterion stand while I did attack my opponent's value and criterion. So that is why the affirmative is won today's round, and that a just society ought to presume consent for organ procurement from the deceased.